Okay, let's dive into this. We absolutely love to celebrate independence, don't we? I mean, we treat it like this static, permanent prize that we've already won. We've got it, right? But when we actually look at the source material regarding the legal realities of our society, we find this fascinating dissonance. Just think about it for a second. From the literal moment you wake up, before you even step foot outside your house, your daily routine has already interacted with thousands of invisible statutes. The water coming from your tap, the electricity powering your coffee maker, even the zoning laws that dictate exactly how far your bedroom has to be from the street. All of that exists entirely because of an underlying legal framework. So, in the realm of law, independence isn't just a feeling. It's an architecture. It's a highly complex structure. And the wild thing is, most people have literally never studied the structure they live under every single day.
Now, we're all intimately familiar with the myth of independence, the fireworks, the summer parades, all that historical symbolism, and those really warm, feel-good stories we tell ourselves about liberty. We basically wrap ourselves up in this cozy emotional blanket. But standing in stark, harsh contrast to that warm feeling is the actual law. Jurisdiction, authority, enforceable rights. This side of the equation is sharp. It's rigorously defined, and it is absolute in its application. It genuinely doesn't care about the parade, it cares about the paperwork. And the thing is, most of us completely confuse the inspiring celebration of independence with an actual grounded understanding of the power structures operating quietly in the background of our lives.
Which brings us to a foundational truth of this entire explainer. Flags don't define freedom, systems do. Just let that reality sink in for a second. The freedom you actually experience in your daily life depends entirely on something most people actively avoid looking at: authority. When the source material talks about systems, we mean the very literal, enforceable codes that dictate, say, whether you can start a business in your garage, or whether the city's going to show up and fine you for doing it. That system of authority is the actual boundary of your freedom.
Section 1. How law defines freedom. Enforceable reality.
So let's start stripping away that abstract mythology we were just talking about. We really need to look squarely at the grounded reality of what the law actually recognizes. You see, here, freedom is defined not as some natural state of being, but as a legal state. Freedom isn't this abstract concept just floating out there in the ether for us to grab onto. It exists exclusively inside defined systems. We're talking constitutions, statutes, court rulings. And crucially, this is key, it is always balanced with regulation and interpreted through enforcement structures. Put simply, a right doesn't just exist because you passionately feel like it does. It exists because an enforceable system recognizes and actually upholds it. For example, let's say there's a local court ruling on eminent domain or zoning. You might feel you have the absolute freedom to do whatever you want on a piece of land you bought, right? But if a judge rules that a utility company has an easement to run power lines straight through your backyard, well, your abstract feeling of freedom instantly bows to the enforceable structure of the court.
It's brilliantly illustrated here how we often think of movement, property, speech, and contract as just basic human defaults. But let's look at how these abstract rights immediately translate into enforceable realities. Take movement. You might think of it as simply walking wherever you please, but try walking through a TSA checkpoint at the airport or wandering across a private zoning line without the right enforceable paperwork. You'll very quickly meet the reality of borders, passports, and trespassing laws. Or property. Property isn't just holding something in your hands. It's the title deed, the registration, the property taxes you have to continuously pay just to keep the local government from taking it back. And heaven forbid you try to collect rainwater on your own property without a local permit in certain jurisdictions. Speech? It has defamation, libel, and incitement boundaries meticulously drawn by courts. Contracts? They require highly specific legal parameters just to be upheld by a judge. Absolutely every single freedom we claim is strictly tied to a framework of enforceability and regulation.
Section 2. Independence versus dependency, the hidden layer.
This is where we shift the narrative to the psychological layer. We're going to go down the rabbit hole a bit here to realize just how fundamentally dependent we all are on hidden systems we almost never think about. See, when we think of dependency, we usually picture being dependent on some big abstract idea of the government. But the reality is far more granular. Records, licensing, registration, courts, these are the invisible daily institutions that validate our claims to reality. People aren't just dependent on the state in theory. No, they are tethered to a vast unseen matrix of daily administrative dependency. Really think about it. Your identity, your ability to legally drive a car, your marital status. Even something as incredibly mundane as buying a cup of coffee or connecting to Wi-Fi relies on a massive invisible web of health codes, business licenses, telecom regulations, and banking laws just to process a simple $3 transaction. The whole shebang relies entirely on this administrative machinery validating your existence and your actions.
So the absolutely crucial point is this. You are not outside the system. You are inside a system you didn't study. If you take literally nothing else away from this explainer, remember this quote. It highlights the profound vulnerability of living inside a structural matrix without having any systemic literacy. I mean, how can you navigate a maze if you refuse to acknowledge the walls around you? Because eventually, you are going to run into one of those walls, and it usually happens when you least expect it. It looks like a sudden, bewildering legal dispute, or a denied building permit for a home renovation, or maybe waking up to find your bank account frozen over some bureaucratic error you didn't even know was possible. When you don't study the maze, the walls dictate your path.
Section 3, Redefining True Independence. Grounded definition.
Okay, so we've looked at the problem of dependency and the blind spots in our legal literacy. Now, let's pivot to the solution. Let's rebuild our understanding of independence into something incredibly empowering and completely grounded in reality. True independence equals clarity plus literacy plus awareness of enforceable reality. Independence is not some magical escape from the modern world. It is not a complete rejection of society, and it is certainly not the romantic mythology we see in the movies. True independence is simply understanding the structure well enough that you are no longer actively misled by it. It's actually a lot like sitting down to play a really complex board game. The illiterate player, the one who refuses to read the manual, gets constantly frustrated, penalized, and ultimately loses because things keep happening to them that just seem totally unfair. But the literate player, the one who actually takes the time to study the mechanics and the rules, they can use those very same constraints to their advantage. They see the board clearly.
Which brings us here. Independence is not leaving the system. It is no longer being confused by it. Systemic awareness is the ultimate tool for true freedom. When you're no longer confused by the licensing, the jurisdictions, the courts, and those enforceable realities that govern your life, you regain your agency. You transition from being this passive participant who just gets pushed around by the system to an active, literate architect of your own life. Think about it. An active architect knows exactly how to structure a business to legally minimize liabilities. They know exactly what permits they actually need and which ones they don't, instead of just guessing. They understand how to read a contract, not just for what it says, but for what it legally enforces. By removing the confusion, you unlock a highly functional, highly practical form of everyday freedom.
Which brings us to a crucial question for you to ponder right now. Do you understand the system you are celebrating freedom inside of? We spend our holidays celebrating the grand idea of freedom, wrapping ourselves up in that comforting myth we talked about earlier. But as we've seen in our analysis of this source material today, the real question is much simpler and honestly much more demanding of our attention. The reality of freedom is built on paperwork, authority, and jurisdiction. So take a long moment to think about your own legal literacy and your own daily dependencies. Because the undeniable truth is this: what you don't understand will always decide for you. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious and keep learning.